As we jump into game number 1 here, we will welcome, in the color blue, Vam playing as the Delhi Sultanate, and in red it is going to be, representing my insanity, TheMista, with the Chinese fitting the red color out there for a chance to play in the Heidelberg $300,000 Red Bull Wololo Legacy LAN. The winner of this best of 7 gets a ticket to Heidelberg, the loser will have to retry later.
Oh yeah, and you know that's I like that detail you mentioned. You know, my insanity, like representing. You know, we've got a few European orgs in here standing up. You got game leads for Age of Empires 2. You ever thought the reason why NA like teams don't get involved is they just don't have the home representation? Well, maybe this is where things can change. We just saw Puppypool make it through. Wham now potentially on the line. Maybe finally we'll start seeing names like EG and Cloud9 show up in this department, but. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just excited for the future here, Lidakor. Like, I'm so over the moon to see these players like qualifying, to see the potential Wololo on the horizon, the biggest moment in AoE4 history. And here we are witnessing a key moment in it as we've already parked one player with a ticket to Heidelberg. We've still got one more to sort by the end of the stream.
And as you mentioned, Puppypool already got his ticket to Heidelberg here. There's a chance that the two twin brothers from Canada, the two players that had less than $500 total earning in competitive esports just a couple of months ago, could get their ticket into a $300,000 premier LAN event, the largest in Age of Empires history, on the very same day. How cool is that? Imagine the next family meetup if this happens.
Imagine, we talked about Mista and like what would he do with the money. Imagine what Wham and Puppypool would do with the money that they'll make from Wololo. First thing on the menu, deforestation. We need to get all these trees out from around our house because they have cost us a lot of money in tournaments before via power outages. Never again. And that's what I'm looking forward to is when we do get through to Wololo, when we do get in person, these technical issues, they aren't there. Unless, of course, you brought your own mouse and it's like a Windows 98 one. But outside that, you're all around the same place. If the internet goes down, if the power line crashes, everything gets postponed, and we still get to enjoy the best Age of Empires imaginable between these leviathans in the AoE4 scene.
I thought you were gonna say that Wham is just going to buy a new computer for himself because the Canadian brothers, they notoriously are known for playing on low graphics settings, and if you have ever opened the game with low graphics settings, you will vomit. It looks disgusting. And a story behind that is that back when Age of Empires 4 was released, their computers was really weak to run the game. So they could only run it at low default settings, basically. And I think they got a slightly better computer recently, so now they could run it at a higher setting. But the problem is that they got so used to those low, terrible graphics settings that they no longer deviate from it. So I think they're the only pro players that play the game in its most disgusting form when it comes to graphics.
That's actually a funny detail to me. It's like over here in the RTS land, strategy land, we're like, meh, we want our game to look pretty. If I've got at least 60 frames, like in most cases, people are comfortable. Like when you look at FPSs, yeah, if you've ever watched your favorite streamer, all the settings are lowest. I need 240 frame stat or I just can't play my game. There's so many players in this, they're willing to just make their game look pretty and sacrifice the frames for it, which is kind of a little bit interesting to me because I think there's still like an element of input lag to consider that maybe will one day be the difference maker in people's minds and everyone will just change to the low settings.
I mean, we haven't gotten to the point where Age of Empires 2 has gotten a couple of years ago. We had players legitimately substituting trees with green cubes and berries with red cubes because this is how it was efficient. It was done by the Finns, it was a very well-known thing, and the only thing that was crazier than that is that there is a pro player in AoE 2, the same player that did this, who is using just a single finger to click both mouse buttons. I'm gonna leave you time for that. Yup. Imagine that.
Well, we don't have to worry about that because we're sophisticated here in Age of Empires 4. No, in Age of Empires 4, we have things called sacred sites, and those sacred sites are going to be fought over. Look what we're seeing here. Earlier today, in a Chinese-Delhi matchup, it was the Canadian on the Chinese, and he done a similar move, but keep in mind, this is a very different map, Lidakor, because unlike that map that was outside, this one's a lot more open, and the other sacred sites look a lot more accessible.
And it's gonna be very difficult for the Chinese player to deny those sacred sites because they're also evenly spread across the map. It's not like Lipany where you have two sacred sites close to one another. It's an almost even distribution of the sacred sites across the map. So sure thing, you deny the one in the middle, but you still leave the option open for Wham to grab the one in the north and the south.
And it has to be said, like, you know, this type of matchup, it's to the benefit of the Chinese if we can drag out a little bit later. But something interesting to think about is comparing Wham and Poppypool's playstyles. They're both phenomenal Delhi players. But Poppypool, to me, is a little bit more like on point in the way he plays the 10, 15 minutes. Overall, from the games I've been seeing from both, Wham is more on point when he reaches into that 30, 35. Now, that can be dangerous territory to the Chinese, but I like to think of it in a more interesting way. It's naturally easier for you to aggress and control the map in the early midpoints of the Delhi. Actually having that pivot point where you're very good at these transitions 25, 30 minutes in could prove the final nail in the coffin you need to shut down Mista with an unorthodox Chinese pick on such an open map like Dry Arabia.
Indeed, many of you may have been wondering why Chinese was the civilization pick here for Mista. We do have to keep something very important in mind. This is a best of 7, and we have 8 civilizations available in the game, one of them being banned. So if we go all the way to 7 games, every single civilization has to be used for both players. So you do have to evaluate this as a thing. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to pick my Mongols here because you might want to use Mongols elsewhere. And in one of the maps, you will have to use Chinese if we go to 7 games. So Mista said, maybe I'm going to pop out one of my weaker civilizations and potentially just try to use essentially a throwaway civilization against one of the most powerful civilizations that Wham has.
And I have to wonder if Mista fully expected the Delhi here. Like, it seems kind of dead obvious when you don't ban it out. Dry Arabia's up. Like, this is kind of the popular go-to. I believe in the last set it wasn't banned, right? It was Roos that was banned between Poppypool and Vortex. But yeah, he delayed it for a long time. But Wham, he wants to come out swinging. I don't blame him, right? Like, it's that kind of thing. There's got to be nerves right now. Like, obviously, you know, this is going to be the biggest event that they'd be able to attend. If he can win here, he will qualify. And, you know, he's just watched how things could backfire. Things can turn around. His bro was on match point, but it took an additional 4 games to get him there. And yet now, in this situation, the best feeling for you is if you can get the first point on the board, because that's such a relief. That's like 1 down, just a few more to go. It's a remarkable difference it can make for players. And there's been talks about this because in some games, like there's an argument that if you think about CSGO and Valorant as an example, being able to get towards, like if you're on the attack or defender, whichever one's stronger first, you're able to get towards a match point or a high score, and it leads to a confidence boost. This has been a discussion for a long time, and I definitely think it's important here.
And it's also the neutral map, so not only are you going to be the guy 1-up, it's the fact that each player has 3 home maps, so you win the only neutral map that we're playing, that is Dry Arabia. It basically means that all you have to do after that is just win your home maps, and you naturally assume that the person picking a specific home map is much more comfortable on that map than he is on, let's say, on the opponent's home map.
Yeah, we saw the power of that, right? Is that technically when we watched the Poppypool Vortex series, Poppypool put himself in a very domineering position to try and force poor picks out of Vortex, as like he was playing his home maps. He wants to put his best foot forward, and every time he was pipping him in the post, denying him out. And hold up,
what's happening? Mista has something on his mind here.
Palace?
There is a lot of things going on. One thing that Core showed us before is that Mista went for an early horticulture, and this is not really a conventional Chinese build. In fact, this is gonna be a sub 9-minute fast castle, mostly fueled by horticulture, I assume, because that's the only reason why you would be getting it so fast. And that's the response that Mista has to the Delhi Flood. Fast castle palace guards, skipping wheelbarrow, going for horticulture. We've talked about this one. This guy might be the biggest innovator of the entire game. You see why. He is the one that takes the meta, holds it in his hand, throws it out of the window, and then just designed completely new things out of nowhere.
Holy Mary of Moses. Mista, with this build, he might have just turned his tractor into a hovercraft. Like, this is going to catch him off guard. Wham was not expecting this at all, for sure. And the outpost also insulated him against early aggression, so Wham was less inclined to go towards the base. And now, this is cool. The Imperial Palace, you saw the vision there. Go back to Mista's perspective. See how much you can see. One of the most underrated elements about this landmark is the vision it gives you, not into villages, but across the map. This is ridiculous.
And it makes sure that you cannot be caught off guard by the flood of the Delhi. And look at the military numbers, that's the more impressive thing. We're looking at 10 horsemen, some archers as well, but palace guards, especially with the supervise, you can get them out really fast, and that's where the horticulture comes into play. You are supervising a barracks to make palace guards. What does palace guards cost? Essentially mostly food. Some gold, sure, but it's mostly food. You streamline your economy for a flood of units, a flood that's even better than the Delhi flood. Vam has to be really surprised about this one. I would be for sure.
And Mista at this rate, he's not only going to have quality, he could quickly have quantity as well via the supervise. He had an Imperial Official in the center, optimizing the distance chase as well as the build-up speed. 2.5 racks in the center next to that Barbican. What a phenomenal play. And now the dive-in, denying out. No answer for Wham. Yes, he's almost got the required resources to go up to Castle, but this might not be his comfortable home Blades build. He might need Compounder Defender just to get a keep down to stop the flood through a Palace Guard.
And the Palace Guards can dive under the town center, so sure thing, you can go to Castle Age, but how are you going to place your landmark? The Palace Guards can stick around. They can camp down the landmark and delay it as long as possible. They are being ground down, but what's the price that Wham is playing for this? 20 villagers idle for the last 30 seconds to try and clean up those Palace Guards, and the next wave is about to come in here for Mista. Mista's push here isn't going to get weaker, it's going to get stronger over time.
And, you know, the remarkable part is, like, Mista, he could have made this better possibly by playing off of a boar, but luckily for Wham, this wasn't one of those spawns. There wasn't a boar next to that sacred site, so he wanted to value blocking out the cat from Wham. And that's another detail. He never has to look at these sacred sites. Yes, it's extra gold for Wham, but instead, he can just double down the aggression because his opponent isn't unlocking a win condition and cannot even unlock the tech up as he's pushed off of this landmark build.
Essentially every single villager Wham has are idle. You see scholars are also getting intercepted over here, jumping out of the production buildings. Could be valuable losses out there.
The scholars can be the difference here. Actually, to his credit, keep in mind Wham isn't losing much. He also did get textiles, so his villagers weren't dying fast. That's why the difference between them is it's still only 4 villages. And consider this, Wham has 2 sacred sites. So while he is an age behind, he's now starting to build up. He has a lot of idle eco, but he's still able to be efficient early on at the beginning of this stage of the game because the Palace Guard cannot quickly dispatch the Horseman and Wham can heal up the damage done.
Nicely buffered up attack over here for Wham. He did lose quite a lot of villagers, tremendous amount of idle time. Those sacred sites are really a lifesaver for him. I'm actually unsure if he has a market though, so he might have an issue balancing out the eco and turning that gold into any meaningful resources that he desperately needs right now as he hits Castle Age.
And he did go for the House of Learning as well. Now, this is a cool dynamic. I actually like this choice. I was worried he'd have to go Compound Defender, and I didn't like it in this game. Home Blades feels better because let's say he starts pushing him out of arms. That sounds stupid, Pigeon. Why would you do that? Palace Guard are faster. Not with Force March, they're not. And you can choose your targets very quickly if you're smart about this with the Deli. I'm excited to see if he actually opts for that play, or if we are just going to get the standardized Lancer build.
You are the single biggest Force March enthusiast I've ever met. I'm not gonna lie.
It's so undervalued. It's so undervalued, Lidakor.
And you love it so much. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying you love it so much. One has to point out such things.
Like, genuinely, it's horrifying to go up against because, like, I don't know if you're a Doctor Who fan, it feels like you're up against Weeping Angels. You blink for a second and all of a sudden they're on you. They move at, like, even Man-at-Arms move at 2.28 movement speed for 10 seconds. That's faster than a Horseman. Whoops.
Yeah, I mean that's Usain Bolt levels of running. 2.2 at 10 seconds.
Think about Spears as well, 2.5? I don't want to live in a world which those type of deli exist. I'd get ran down every day of the week. I'd be the first peasant to die.
Looks like Own Blades is the technology of choice, at least for the time being, on the House of Learning. Relics slowly being brought back, and one thing that Core pointed out to us beforehand is that Mista, in order to facilitate that flood of Palace Guards at the beginning of Castle Age, he had to forfeit some villager production.
Bolo? He's not going for it. He's not blocking him off either because the Spearman here. There's the backup wall, although baiting him in. Mista! He's not paying attention!
He's not paying attention! Ooh, could have been a complete disaster. I was just about to say.
That's the Palace Guard, Lidakor. That's the speed. Good lord.
Yeah, but also the Spearman. They managed to jump out just in time, and I was just about to say that right now Vam doesn't have the forces to stop Palace Guard and Spearman together. He needs a good Wololo, but he's not getting any.
Oh man, you know, I actually got baited into that. Like, it probably wasn't as close as it seems, but sometimes in those critical moments, I think it's when a player doesn't look like they're paying attention. That's when you begin to lose your crap, because it's like, I've been here before. I'll admit, I've been here before. This has happened. It's very easy to lose track for just a second, even when you hear the Wololo. But Mista, he's just playing with us. Wham. He's playing with these relics, but at the end of the day, hasn't netted many just yet. Only one now being banged after his attempt to get 4 in the first place.
Yeah, and the thing is that Mista's relentless over here. He can always pop out the spies to show all the villagers, and that's the thing. There are the sacred sites, but what happens if Wham has 0 working villagers? Because that's the direction that we're heading towards. Villagers fleeing on the south, and the same thing is happening on the north.
And this can get worse. If Mista at any stage chooses to go for, say, a certain Castle Age landmark that would give him Yuan. Okay, we got a Wololo. Mista may have forgotten. Oh, I know what happened. He clicked them away, and he thought he was out of range because he was focusing on this melee group. So just 2 freebies.
Yeah, they aggroed back in. Mista,
Yeah,
he's doing a great job cornering Wham. I'm actually thinking more and more about Mista mining stone. Because an aggressive Chinese castle drop might be difficult to stop right now for Wham. You want to finish this game fast still, because there are sacred sites, there are relics. You can drop a castle in the next few minutes because you still have the superiority.
Mista hasn't got many spears here, by the way. These trades are about to get bad. Homeblade's soon to complete, and then the Lancers aren't really counted out. They can trade pretty effectively at that stage.
This is a pretty good fight over here, almost a cleanup. Onblade's yet to finish here for Wham, but as you said, spearman numbers not looking great. And keep in mind that Mista, this is not the ordinary Chinese build. It's not like he's on 2 town centers with Song. In fact, I have to wonder whether he even has gotten Song Dynasty for himself.
He hasn't. He
So
never went for it. Like,
yeah, the eco is very weak as well for Mista.
And it's weak in a different way, because he's now up against Lancers. He's starting to lose control of the game. Look where he's at. Look what's happening. The Palace Guard are being used
the revenge of the Palace Guards.
The betrayal. They're like, wait, you're wearing our uniforms. Yeah, but notice the slight stripes are blue. I don't work for you anymore. Higher bidder.
Indeed, the bid was much higher because Wham has the gold to give a very high bid to those units.
And keep in mind, that's not the only pocket eco that Mista had. He has another one north of that on the extra deer. So, like, the worrying issue for Mista right now is he's struggling to keep up with demand, and he hasn't transitioned to safe eco. And he's up against Lancers. While the eco count was ahead for him, now look at it. It's neck and neck. And this striking is not going to be as effective because, remember, one side has textiles and the other does not.
And a key thing is that Mista's lacking mobility as compared to the army of Wham. So if Mista decides to dive into snipe villagers, Wham can do the exact same thing. And Wham is much swifter with those Lancers. He can do a ton more damage as compared to those Palace Guards.
And I don't see him upgrading this Palace Guard anytime soon. I don't think we're getting double Castle Age here. There's not going to be any Yuan Dynasty, no 2-legged cavalry. The Lancers will always dictate the pace. And the worst part behind it as well is, like, remember, herbal medicine isn't in the mixer yet. It's coming. And then these scholars will make sure you never get good trades against the Lancers. Lancers that want prolonged fights because they're home blades, but not like this, not when they get surrounded. Nice move. Mista goes to the back line. Scholars going to pat each other on the head, but these Lancers are still getting good trades in the meantime as they clean up the melee mosh pit. Poor little scholar. He's just like, wait, guys, come back. You forgot one of me. No, we've got enough scholars at home. We had too many.
Many of those Palace Guards were heavily damaged in that engagement, but the Knights weren't focusing them down, so many of the low HP Palace Guards were still successful, dishing out some punishment towards those Scholars. But now Mista could be the one being in trouble, because those Lancers are hunting for villagers, so are the Palace Guards and the Spears. But look at the overall HP. The overall HP is so low on those. Ooh, he's gonna find it.
Here. Screw the dive in the deli base, check this beauty out. Wham! He's reacting to the assault right now, so he shifts past, but he should actually have that marked on his map now. Find the base. Lancer line needs to refresh quickly or get healed up. Right now, Mista's dodging a bullet though. Wham! He hasn't moved them. He's distracted by all the other fights. And he's noticed this. Mista getting desperate, now playing onto the ball as he's trying to delay the farms. Finally, reaction comes out. Wham! Is going to strike over here. And these villagers, they're in trouble because Mista, true to form, he doesn't need wheelbarrows. This guy uses tractors. He hasn't got wheelbarrow.
Oh, that's going to hurt so much. You already have the movement speed advantage with those Lancers, but lacking wheelbarrow, lacking textiles even, it is going to be so many unnecessary casualties. Many of them could have been avoided with those techs in for Mista. And at the end of the day, we're looking at a 10 villager lead for the Delhi player over a Chinese player. Not something that you see every day, and for a good reason.
And the relics on top of that, like, he's effectively at 54 eco compared to 26. 26, 25 now for the Chinese, and shrinking, shriveling Fursma, because after you ran back to your base, he didn't stop. Wham moved the Lancers onto the woodline as well, and Mista is almost below 20 villagers.
He didn't even notice. There's no way he noticed it. He's still losing villagers. He's too focused on the palace guards, but with no spearman support. Lancers are cleaning it up. Look at this. Mista still yet to notice this.
What is it with these Canadians? First Poppy Paw with 4 horsemen, and now Wham! With the 2 Lancers of the Apocalypse able to run him through. Mista will shrivel up and call GG. Game 1 goes to the Canuck.
What a game over here. Mista pulled one out of the bag of tricks, and for a long time it seems like maybe Mista have found a way how to deal with the Delhi Sultanate, but one thing that he never was able to address was the 2 sacred sites, the lifeline for Vam over here. Maybe if Mista had walls on those, or maybe if he broke through the walls or prevented the capture beforehand, this could have been different. But those sacred sites kept Vam alive long enough for him to buffer up the aggression of Mista and ultimately turn things around. With that, Vam takes a key win on the only neutral map here in the decider of the June monthly.